Story 1. His personality was basically a blank Word document, but he looked like he was carved by angels. For 3 months, my main hobby was just being optimistic. Story 2. She told me straight up that she was crazy. She was gorgeous, which did not deter me. She stabbed me in the leg with a switchblade, told the police I was a drug dealer, and hid a gun from me. Story 3. You shouldn't date me. You will eventually grow to resent me and hate me. I told her that wasn't true, but it was. Story 4. Whenever she stayed over, she would leave at 4 a.m. to go home because her housemate would be suspicious if she was not home. It turned out the housemate was her boyfriend, who got home from work at 5 a.m. They are still together, have a child, and live one suburb over from me. Story 5. She lied to me about her birthday and then became upset when it arrived because I did not say anything. Story 6. In separate conversations, she told me that her brother, mother, father, and ex were all narcissists. Guess how she ended up behaving? Story 7. She used my laptop to take out a payday loan to buy cocaine before we left my apartment for dinner. Story 8. I once had a guy's mom tell me her son was a cheating man whore. I stayed with that asshole for years. 18-year-old me was an idiot. Story 9. He unironically thought dinosaurs weren't real, saying something about museums trying to sell tickets. My brain just went full dial-up tone. But the man was built like a Greek god, so I figured I could teach him about Jurassic Park later. I could not. Story 10. She broke into my house twice, woke me by climbing into my bed and grabbing my penis, and I had rather aggressive sex with her. The third time she broke in, she came with a .44 Magnum revolver. Story 11. When I asked her to be my girlfriend, she said I should not date her because she was a whore. I reassured her that she was not and that we would be a great couple. In the end, she turned out to be a whore. Story 12. I keep falling for the red flags because the poles they are attached to are mighty fine. Story 13. There were many, but they were not attractive. They only gave me attention. Story 14. I have cheated in every relationship I have been in. At least she was honest. Story 15. On our second date, he called me while I was in the bathroom to tell me he was abandoning me at the show. We were in the middle of nowhere. He then laughed and said he was joking. I had no idea how low my self-esteem was. I felt I had to put up with it or I would be labeled a nasty, nagging woman. Story 16. Extreme insecurity. Trust me, it will come back to bite you in the ass. Story 17. Our first date was at a Narcotics Anonymous convention. I had never seen illegal drugs and had only been drunk a handful of times. It was fun, but such a first date was, in fact, as big a red flag as you would imagine. Story 18. She cheated on her husband to be with me. I remember thinking that one day she would cheat on me. Things turned out exactly as I had expected. Story 19. She told me, "You are such a good person. You should not be with me." She was right. Story 20. I was pursued and love-bombed by a card-carrying sociopath. Just as I was letting my guard down and ignoring the giant red flags, she had a moment of clarity and told me that all her ex-partners start out as healthy, happy go-getters, and then for some reason quickly end up like hollow husks. She also said she does not have boyfriends. She has projects. Yikes. Story 21. She told me she was not completely over her ex, who had cheated on her. More than 2 years later, she cheated on me with him. Story 22. I endured lying, deceit, and manipulation for 3 years. I have been free for almost 2 months. Story 23. I ignored the book she gave me on the second date titled I Hate You. Please don't leave me. Dealing with borderline personality disorder. Story 24. My ex-husband, while we were dating, said his worst trait was selfish. I assumed he meant stealing the covers and eating the last fry. I did not expect selfish to mean scheduling our son's important surgery during my hunting time and then leaving to go hunting after the surgery. The doctor told me to schedule it as soon as possible, so I took the first available option. Our son was in a lot of pain afterward, and I was left alone with our 18-month-old while he went hunting. I knew it was over after that. I should have asked him to explain what he meant by selfish. Story 25. She was very quiet. I later learned she was clinically depressed, and I realized I was not emotionally equipped to be with someone who has clinical depression. If you are clinically depressed, you still deserve love and commitment. You can find the right person who will be a good partner and improve your life. Depression is not a red flag for everyone. It just is for me. I simply was not that person. I have anxiety of my own, and I found that my ex and I were bringing out the worst in each other despite our genuine affection. She later married someone else and had children. She is much better off, and so am I. Story 26. He was extremely avoidant, troubled in many ways, financially broke, and an addict. He was the hottest man I had ever seen, ridiculously attractive. I had a heavy crush on him for 1.5 years. Now I am basically free from him. Story 27. My husband is in the Hells Angels motorcycle club. Turns out I should have paid attention. Edited for autocorrect inaccuracy. Story 28. His apartment contained only a mattress on the floor and an alarming number of empty Gatorade bottles. I thought he was just focused on his goals. Story 29. They said my ex was crazy about every past relationship, and somehow I thought I would be the exception. Story 30. At a pool party early in our relationship, she became very drunk and, after everyone left, tried to get into the water naked. She was far too intoxicated to be in a bathtub, let alone a pool. A few years after we married, her drinking worsened and cost her a couple of jobs. Fortunately, she sobered up and we are still married, but I would not wish those years on anyone. Story 31. My first priority is and always will be myself. Well, that was truer than I thought. During the relationship, she moved in with her ex-boyfriend, who is also her stepbrother. Story 32. My main takeaway from this thread is that being attractive can help you have sexual encounters quite easily, despite one's obvious character flaws. Story 33. We hooked up within 3 hours of meeting, which was not a red flag in my view, and she came to my place the next night, which was as close to heaven as I'll ever get. She was cool and we talked a lot, but I noticed a pattern of her being vague about details of her life. I asked her on dates she agreed to, but those plans always fell through. She eventually told me that her mind wasn't in the right place as a reason for ending things. She had mentioned once that she was bisexual but preferred women. At first I thought I was special, but later I believed she meant men were for fun and women for relationships. Ultimately, I think I was a side guy she was keeping hidden. Story 34. A guy showed up for class wearing a garbage bag as a rain jacket. We have been married 15 years now, laughing out loud. Story 35. They told me all their exes were crazy, and somehow I thought, surely I'll be different. Spoiler, I was not. Story 36. She was rebounding hard. She came on like a freight train. I fell in love, phallus first. It didn't really end well, but in retrospect I don't resent her for it. Story 37. He had 3 different mothers of his children and was not in a relationship with any of them. None of the children lived with him. But my God, the body on that man and the sex were incredible. I would never be in a relationship with him and would never have his child, but I stayed with him until I could no longer tolerate his attitude. Story 38. He clapped when the plane landed, which felt like a truly unforgivable act. But his arms looked strong enough to crush a watermelon, so my brain recategorized it as being passionate about safe air travel. Story 39. 1. She would say whatever she needed to avoid being wrong, even contradicting herself within the same conversation. Over time, nothing was consistent. The rules in the relationship changed based on whatever she wanted in the moment. 2. She aggressively complained about how other people drove, even though she drove the same way. It was the first clear display of her lack of empathy. I remember telling myself that the moment she directed that at me, I was out. 5 years later, after one failed marriage, it became clear she could only process life from her own perspective and could not understand her role in any problem. Story 40. He got fuck off tattooed across his knuckles on our first date. By date 4, he was having them lasered off because his mother's dying wish was for them to be removed. I should have run then, but I kept hitting myself with the stupid stick. Thank God I eventually wised up, married a wonderful man, and I love my life. Story 41. She said she had to tell me that she was not over her ex. I was the rebound, and after a few months it became obvious she did not like me. She was very attractive, and I still think about how she looked. Story 42. She was off the crazy hot scale, but I listened to my dick instead of my head. Story 43. It turned out to be more red flags than the Chinese army. But at that point in my life, any attention seemed to outweigh any perceived trouble. She told me on our second hangout that she had cancer that was in remission. After 2 years of baffling arguments and ordeals, she was jailed for assaulting me, and I was admitted to a psychiatric ward because I had been avoiding my life to such an extent that I tried to void the life part. I finally cut off contact. I later confirmed that she did not, in fact, have cancer. She then married the man she had previously claimed was stalking her and had a child with him. Story 44. I'm an alcoholic. It was not the fun kind. It was drinking to get wasted, starting fights, and destroying our lives. Story 45. Her favorite movie was the live-action Cat in the Hat, unironically. I remember my one brain cell just short-circuiting as I tried to reconcile that information with the fact she was a solid 10 out of 10. We dated for 6 months. Story 46. Selfishness and immaturity. She was still living at home at 27 and seemed to want to move from being taken care of by her parents to being taken care of by a husband. We broke up after I sarcastically referred to her as the princess. She exploded. It was clear I had struck a chord. Months later, I ran into her and asked why that comment had ended the relationship. She explained that her father called her that at home because she had never moved out and was still being coddled by her parents. It was something she was aware of but wanted to avoid. She was a pretty, fun woman who had no interest in growing up or taking on responsibility. Years later, I learned she married but divorced within a year. It was likely her first time living outside her parents' home, and she struggled to manage household responsibilities. Story 47. We were getting close. She ghosted me for 6 months. She came back and apologized, but I should have accepted the red flag for what it was and kept it at arm's length. I did not. Years of regret. When people show you who they are, believe them. Story 48. He was using his addictions to self-medicate his anxiety and unaddressed trauma. He was very attractive and his sexual skills were impressive. For reference, I am a therapist. I should have known better, but I was drawn to the chaos. Story 49. I took a redhead hairdresser I met on Tinder to a play after my scheduled date canceled at the last minute. She put her feet up on the seats in front of us. Story 50. On our first date, she pushed me down to the floor and laughed with her friend, breaking my nose because I had accidentally opened her pack of socks. She wanted to be with me, and we were together for a beautiful 8 years until she was forcibly removed by the police. Story 51. Moral of this thread: listen to women when they tell you something. Story 52. She said she would watch herself eat naked in a mirror to shame herself into staying thin and not eating. She was mentally unwell, but the sex was incredible. Story 53. She told me, I'm jealous, childish, have poor coping skills and, quite likely, a personality disorder I don't want to look into. She also said, I will ruin you. I should have stuck to my guns the first time I dumped her. Story 54. The first night we were in her house, she randomly slapped me, saying, just to test, to see how I would react. Story 55. I was 19. I can be a bit jealous at times, but don't worry, it's not too bad. A few days later, she punched me in the face and threw both our glasses against a wall because she noticed a picture of me and my sister on my desk. We still dated for a couple of weeks because she was very attractive and fun. I broke up with her when I mentioned my sister and she said, that bitch should never come to your place anymore, or I'll kick her in the head. I just don't like her. Story 56. Her depression, autism, and closed-off personality. She had an incredibly high libido and couldn't get enough of kissing and sex. She could go on forever until she fell asleep. She was very smart, had a master's degree in architecture, and on a good day she was sweet and pleasant to be around. However, her challenges made her difficult to handle. She had an urge to always be right, sometimes failed to understand what people said, and could not remember faces, which is why she was attracted to my scent instead. When she was tired or sick, she became unbearably irritable, including toward me. During our short time together, I felt insecure because of all the possible mistakes I could make. Every time I tried to do better, it escalated into an argument to the point where she targeted my vulnerabilities. I am not the right person to handle this complex person. When it worked, it felt like heaven, but it was overshadowed by the drama it caused. Story 57. He told me in all seriousness that his astrological sign was the main factor in his compatibility with people. It was not just that he was a Libra. He said Mercury in retrograde was preventing him from making rational decisions that quarter. I ignored it because he looked like a young Brad Pitt. 3 months later, he canceled our trip because Venus had entered the house of eclipses and it was an unfavorable time for travel. I realized that even Brad Pitt was not worth such sacrifices. Story 58. She came from an abusive household. Her mother cheated on her father with his friend. Her father was a drug addict who beat her severely and she ended up in the hospital. Her father went to jail. Her stepfather also beat her mother. Her mother stole money from her stepfather to give to her family and to her ex-husband. When I was a naive 14-year-old, I thought she was attractive and did not pay attention to her situation. She was deeply traumatized at a young age. I was with her for years trying to help, and eventually realized that neither professional treatment nor my support could change her. I wasted years of my life in that drama. When I broke up with her, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders and a marked improvement in how I felt about myself. I knew I would not make that mistake again. Story 59. Both my friends and hers told me she was a whore. I told myself that the phase of her life was over, but it was not. Story 60. Hangout 1. I did not want children. Hangout 2. I always wanted 8 children. She also changed her stance on religion. She went from saying she did not care to saying they would not have sex until they were married. That was not a deal breaker at the time. She was hiding that she wanted to be a traditional wife and was racist and transphobic. Story 61. She had been in a violent relationship with a former friend of mine. We became friends after the falling out we both had with him. Long story short, he was not the only violent person, and that is how I received my first black eye from a partner. Other red flags included her parents pulling me aside and telling me they would not blame me if I left, and her 4 children, 3 in her custody and up to 6 possible fathers. I was naive and desperate then. Story 62. She is mean to wait staff and other service workers. Anyone who mistreats people because they think they can will eventually treat you the same way. Story 63. I am wired differently. Oh, wired how? Like an autistic person? Well, kind of, but not really. I assume she was autistic but too shy to admit it. She was, in fact, a narcissist and she knew it. Story 64. She was a Nazi sympathizer. This was around 2005. I was crazy for her and went to her house almost every day. One day we were on her computer, and I noticed a bunch of open tabs with names like Stormfront and Furchan. I thought, that's some bad stuff. Did she mean for me to see that? The next day we were in the car and I made a joke comparing Bush to Hitler. She said, "Oh, Bush is a novice and Hitler did nothing wrong." I was in complete shock. This tiny, gorgeous college girl said that, but she gave me oral sex while we were driving, and I kind of let it go. Then she let me take a video of her doing a striptease. Luckily, it wasn't a screwdriver, laughing out loud. Thankfully, she dumped me, presumably because I kept making shitty jokes about nationalism being for pussies and playing Don't Call Me White by the punk band NoFX all the time. For those few months, her body was literally the only thing on my mind. She would be about 40 or so by now, so I can't imagine what she's like with the recent uptick in out and proud Nazis. Story 65. He is always trying to make me angry. I do not know why. He refuses to accept the breakup. Love bombing. Obsession. But he looks exactly like what teenage me would have wished for. Story 66. The first date was when I took her to her psychiatric appointment. Story 67. Ghosting and the "I've been busy" excuse. I still give it a pass if she is attractive. I have worked 12 to 18-hour days for 10 to 12 weeks straight on movie shoots, and even longer on tours with rock and punk bands, putting out fires all day and responding to dozens or hundreds of texts, emails, and everything in between. I know what nonstop busy is, and even on the worst days, I still find 10 seconds to respond to texts from girlfriends and potential love interests, even if they are just asking how my day is going. Story 68. My now ex-girlfriend called me 47 times and texted me 124 times the day after we first had sex, while I was working my overnight shift. She says she was drugged at a bar and does not remember it. She also left her car running in a subway parking garage with the driver's door open and her purse overturned, which caused the state police to shut down the entire rail corridor while they searched for a suicidal person or someone who had been abducted. I ignored it because she was attractive and the sexual compatibility was the best I had ever experienced. We dated for a while and drifted apart when she stopped taking her mental health medication and stopped going to therapy. Story 69. They said they broke hearts like it was something they couldn't control. I thought, what a funny thing to say, as we were 4 months into a relationship. A year and a half in, they stopped being nice to me. They told me my body wasn't attractive, and that they didn't enjoy spending time with me. Shit changed me fundamentally. Story 70. In college, I asked out a very attractive classmate named Kristen. On our first date, she told me that when we were together, I should call her Penelope. I was young, thought it was funny and fun, and she was very attractive, so I agreed. Things got weird. Story 71. Her mom told me, while we were playing a board game with her parents, that I had lasted longer than any other guy she'd seen because she hadn't cut me off yet. We were only seeing each other for a few weeks, and then she ghosted me. I tried messaging her a while later when I was in a committed relationship and explained that time had passed and I was happy. I don't think it was a red flag. She was probably just scared of getting to know someone. Story 72. Laughing out loud. Man, all through my 20s I was a straight-up sex addict. I didn't ignore red flags. I was attracted to them. Story 73. She said she was a crazy bitch. She was attractive. I slept with her, ended my relationship with my then-girlfriend, became engaged, and married her. We had 2 children and attended marriage counseling, where she believed the counseling existed solely for me to change my behavior. I stayed until the children were adults. Then I divorced. Did I ignore the red flag? Yes, but the experience taught me to value communication, mutual respect, and healthy boundaries in a relationship. I would not change a thing. Story 74. Oh, definitely the classic lack of communication. They were fine as hell, so I convinced myself their silence was mysterious rather than problematic. Spoiler, it was not. Story 75. He told me he didn't care when his childhood dog was put down, and he couldn't understand anyone who cared when their dog died. Turned out he didn't really have much empathy. Story 76. They said, my ex is crazy. And I thought, same, bestie. Story 77. Another friend told me that she once told him she was down to only 2 boyfriends right now. I convinced myself he must have misunderstood or been excluding relevant context, and there had to be some explanation. There was indeed an obvious explanation. Story 78. On one of the first dates with an incredibly good-looking man who had the body of a Greek god and did some modeling, he told me he was a little bit crazy and always had been. A year later, he had proven he was not lying, and I could not break up with him. He showed explosive anger and violent outbursts. Punching walls, intense jealousy, suicide attempts to crash my car, quitting jobs, and feigning illness so I would stay with him at the hospital. Eventually, I realized the only way out was to get him to break up with me, and to my surprise, that was much easier than I expected. Life lesson. When someone tells you they are crazy, believe them. Story 79. He said his best friend was trapped with a baby. The friend has children he adores and a wife he is obsessed with. Story 80. They chose me. Anyone who dates me has quite poor taste. Story 81. We played Are You Smarter Than a 5th Grader at his behest. Only one of us was. Then he defeated me soundly. Story 82. The phone was always face down, and All My Exes Are Crazy was playing. I saw it, but I still proceeded. Story 83. I met her in Rome while backpacking through Europe. We hooked up one night right before I left. She told me a story about how she was petty and had slept with her ex's baby mama to get back at him. It did not set off any red flags in my mind, but it fully registered when she cut my visit short in her home state after yelling at me for almost a full day and then dropping me at the airport for a red-eye flight back to my state that I had bought an hour earlier. Knowing myself, though, I would probably do it again. Story 84. The drinking, the lying, the nasty streak, the deep bench of platonic male friends. She was a demon in every way you want your woman to be, and in every way you do not. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.